Hello, everybody. I am thrilled to be surrounded by my fellow co-plaintiffs, and this has been a long battle, and for many of us, longer than you realize. It started before COVID, where medical boards were using their power to silence doctors and come between patients and their physicians, but it really came to a head during the pandemic, as we all know. And so, thanks to the efforts of these physicians that I'm here with today, and attorney Ilya Vyakostikov, I think I got that right. uh, we've been working on this case for a very long time, and all of us have been the medical boards have come after us in one way or another. And so I'm going to let Dr. Kelly Sutton start, and because she was sort of the first to have the board come after her. She wasn't the first to have her license suspended, but she was the first. And so, Dr. Sutton, Kelly Sutton, tell us sort of how this all started, and what happened that got you involved in this lawsuit.
Thanks, Mary. In 2011, California required parents to be educated by a doctor in order to sign their own personal belief exemption and not have their child get every single vaccine on the childhood schedule. So that was sort of the prodrome of getting used to the government interfering with parental rights. And then in 2015, SB 277 was brought, which said that there were no more any personal belief exemptions. And the only way to not have to take all childhood vaccines and attend school in California was to get a medical exemption. And that was based on the doctor's judgment. And it could be personal history, family history. It was not specified as anything narrow at all. And a number of doctors at that time, including myself, began complying with the law and providing medical exemption for children at risk of vaccine injury. And then a couple of years later, we found that we were being investigated. And essentially, the medical board used a different standard than what was in the law to say that we were out of compliance. And I lost my license. A number of others had their probation status set up, and other doctors also had licenses revoked. And then because I was moving to Massachusetts to become grandma, my license there was also looked at based on the legal principle of reciprocal discipline. So I also lost my Massachusetts license and a license from New York that I had never activated, but the state felt it was serious enough that I should have it revoked, even though I had gotten it 40 years ago and never used it.
How many exemptions did you write?
I don't know. I didn't keep track of it. But one thing that happened in the state is doctors were afraid to write exemptions.
Mm-hmm.
So the family doctor or specialists of all kinds would say to the patients, you really should have an exemption, but I can't write it because I'm a part of Kaiser, I'm a part of Sutter, I don't want to lose my license. So I got a lot of patients coming to me that I had not seen prior as my own personal primary care patients because they had no other choice.
Right. I see the same. I mean, that happened during COVID. I was writing exemptions. I was a little bit fearful that
Right.
there would be retribution for writing exemptions. I became sort of the place to go to get an exemption.
Yeah.
So I can definitely relate to that. And then gosh, that's unbelievable. They took your license. Okay, Dr. Mark Brody, I know you suffered at the hands of the medical board. Tell us your story.
Well, I'll tell you the basic facts of the matter, and then I'll give you a short background to make sense of it all. Briefly, in January of 2021, I got a phone call and email from the Department of Health asking me to appear before them in a hearing, it's the Board of Medical Licensure and Discipline, regarding an email letter I had sent to my patients in early December, about 1 or 2 days after the vaccine, COVID vaccine, was publicly released, in which I advised them to wait before submitting to this vaccine for better science to become available. Because, in my opinion, the science that was available had not demonstrated adequately the safety and efficacy of this vaccine. So, to me, this seemed like a very milquetoast, about as mild a thing as you could say. Nevertheless, after the hearing, I was notified that my license had been suspended. They also cooked up some issues with my record keeping that I didn't do dot every I and cross every T, so they could use that I think for legal purposes to
And
say, well, actually,
what state is
which
this?
is in the state of Rhode Island,
Rhode Island, okay.
and which is where I practiced. I still had I had been practicing in Massachusetts for probably 8 or 9, maybe 10 years, and Rhode Island. I had done consulting work through much of the 1990s, but I had kept my license up. I'm not sure why, but so I still had a Massachusetts license, and within months after my suspension in Rhode Island, my Massachusetts license was suspended, much as Kelly's was, through this reciprocal agreement. So anyway, I can go into more details later, but that's the basics outline of the story.
Well, and I did the same thing. I sent an email to my patients, and that email prompted, the Houston Methodists to come after me, and then, the medical boards to come after me. So Dr. Humiston, you're up next. Tell us your story and how you end up in this lawsuit.
Sure. I guess much of mine reflects what Kelly went through. I think that I started probably right 2015, 16, and started writing these exemptions because people came in and they wanted them. My own kids there, we were homeschooling at the time, so we didn't worry about it. But I saw that these people who had a reason that they wanted to send their kids to public school. And I had this strange idea that vaccines are a medical treatment, less like any other medical treatment, and they have the risks and benefits, and that people should kind of know the full story on both sides. They are pretty effective generally, but there's obviously what's the risk profile for every vaccine is the same. Pain at the injection site, etc. A very scant risk of infection is just like rubber stamp. Like, well, that's not the case. And I say it's not the case because I had people coming in, and just like, it was just terrible because you'd get a mom or dad or both, and they come in there just about on the verge of tears, and try not to say the wrong thing. So you won't say, well, I'm not going to do it for you. I just say, look, if you're eligible, I'll give it to you. Let's just get some history here. Some I didn't know, like Dr. Sutton said, and others were my regular panel patients. And so, when it seemed there was certainly factoring in, they have a right to decide whether or not they're going to do this for their child, because once the vaccines are given, there's no recourse. The damage is done. And take out the word vaccines and put any procedure, any medication in there. You know what? This is standard medical ethics, have been legally enshrined for generations. This is what we do. And so it wouldn't be an issue, I guess, for any of us if we hadn't seen, heard stories. We probably all have the same fault of actually taking our patients seriously when they tell us something and considering that valid. And so remember, one man came in, he was older. He came in with his 8-year-old son. He said, I have a 22-year-old son who will never be a functional adult. And it was because of vaccine reaction. And he's asking for a postponement of permanent exemption, something to, what right-minded physician wouldn't give this to him,
Right.
we've got a devastated son. I remember, and then another were two young girls, three older siblings who were given vaccine exemptions, not by me. I never met the older ones. They all had serious vaccine reactions, and the mom didn't know to which vaccine. So you couldn't say, oh, just the MMR or just this or that. So, and these girls, both of them, I mean, this is a McDonald's family, let's just say, they didn't take care of themselves, but the kids already had immune and gut and mental health issues. So they were already kind of train wrecks. And the older kids had been given vaccine exemptions. But so if you had a panel of 10 physicians, 9 or 10 or 8 or 9 of them at least would agree, let's at least delay these vaccines for these kids. And then in California, you got to understand that anything off the schedule, anything that would vary from the recommended schedule, even if you're going to suggest, I think you should delay them for a year, that would require not only an exemption, but essentially after a while you had to give a permanent exemption because they were no longer accepting temporaries. So in the end, I'm saying, my goal as a physician, I don't want to have any brain injured child that I have to think about the rest of my life, that I carelessly failed to do my duty of what I've seen with my own eyes. It happens. And no, is it probably going to happen? Probably not, but it probably isn't big enough. We're not talking about, 1 in 1,000. And we're talking about, generally families that have already had a family history situation. And that's why they're asking for this. So I decided every time I signed one, I thought, yep, this could, bring up some attention from the medical board, but that medical board is just a concept. This child is not a concept. His health, his future is a reality. And so I did what my duty was to do. And then, in the scoop there was a, program, I call it, where they're going to find a certain number of physicians who have prescribed more. You asked Dr. Sutton how many she'd written. I think I wrote in the San Diego Unified School District, I had written, I think they said 16. And I probably wrote, that was the city I was in. So that would have been most of them.
16.
So
and you lost your license?
Right. For that heinous crime. I'm obviously an incompetent physician. So that it was really very, very interesting, the way that the hearing went, it eventually led to a revocation. So here we are.
Well, and from what I understand, they were limiting, there was a number, right? You could only write a certain number of exemptions, at least in California. Is that right?
Well, I mean, that is, as all things in this case in California are, it was very arbitrary. So that was never said anywhere. There was no, and Dr. Sutton, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's never any guidance given by the medical board on how to write a number of exemptions, how to write exemptions. We have that one case where a physician in California emailed the medical board and said, am I qualified to even write these with this new law, SB 277? And the answer he got back was, use your best judgment, right? You've seen that one. Right. So that's from the medical board, recorded history here. And, and I mean, I don't know if any of you have had, specific training in how to write exemptions. I don't think so. I mean, we didn't get specific training on how to write work excuses. You just put together your training, and, your license is considered enough to make you competent to do that. So all of this was just arbitrary, unstated, get you later with, as Ilya has established in this lawsuit, with the specific intent of intimidation, not only of the doctors, but of those families. So they would be afraid that something could happen to them. And, they didn't want, it was to scare them. So that was the motivation, as is well laid out in the lawsuit.
What year did this happen to you?
So I actually left California right at the very beginning of 2019. And I didn't hear about any of this for, I think, about full 2 years after I got to Indiana. And they were looking at, cases that were still within the statute of limitations. And so that they had a few to present. And then, so that the revocation was March of 2023.
Oh, so likely prompted by the pandemic, do you think?
Well, I think that they got, because it wasn't about COVID, of course. This is
Right.
pediatric vaccine exemptions, but I think that that's when that whole thing got emboldened. I've heard that California was really over the top as far as COVID goes. So yeah, probably had to do with that. And moving forward, I still had a license in California, and I was a medical director of a joint injection clinic out there, even though at that time I was living in Indiana. Then later, what happened? Indiana had no problem licensing me, and they were aware of this, that even the revocation in California, and they took no steps. They renewed my license with no restrictions or anything. But then at one point, they suddenly said, we need to do a summary judgment on you. I'm like, why? There's no why there. And but it ended up being because this reciprocal discipline concept that had not come up, curiously, for quite a long time. And then suddenly it was, this is what we're doing. So I was suspended until the revocation in California is lifted.
So are you able to practice medicine right now?
I've got a suspended Indiana license.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. Do you know who turned you in?
There was so it started in Indiana. We had a patient go to a hospital. I was treating IV, and that was fine. She appeared to have a sepsis, but it was fungal, so it actually was very easy to treat. But one of the I think the residents there or something looked me up and saw that I'd been revoked in California, so spent all this time trying to get the patient to write a complaint about me, even though they were very happy that I treated them, and they just stayed quiet because they didn't want to compromise care. But the patient and her husband really let them have it the last day. Like, we resent how you've been badgering Dr. Humiston the last 11 days, or badgering us about him when he's the only doctor who would take me with this very difficult, uncontrolled lithium-based seizure situation. So anyway, they went in and turned in a complaint, and the complaint was one sentence. He administered IV NAD and this other kind of treatment. There was no actual claim of any harm or anything like that. So I wrote back, well, where's the rest of the complaint? And they said, well, there isn't any more. But I think that might have prompted something. I don't know. It was odd because it was a complete departure. Before that, Indiana did not seem very impressed by California at all.
Well, and then who turned you in for writing exemptions, do you think?
I don't know if this happened with Dr. Sutton too, but there was this mechanism. It's kind of explained in the lawsuit that ILEA put together, that they obtained information on doctors who had written exemptions by looking at school records. And those school records, names redacted, but they came out and were published in a number of papers. For mine, it was the Voice of San Diego. And that just listed not the children's names, but the doctors who were associated with them, and just details like that. And so
they published that in the paper?
Sure, why not?
The doctors' names too?
The doctors' names, not the children.
Wow.
So the doctor's name, right? Yeah. So in other places in the United States, people would have been up in arms about that, but Californians tend not to be very familiar with the rights as Americans and the importance of protecting those. So that, and then it was interesting because the families of those kids got letters from the medical board. I was sent one of them that basically said, you have to give us permission to get your school records. We need this because we're investigating Dr. Humiston. And then at the bottom in small print, it says, this is voluntary, but that's not the tone of the letter,
right, right.
Intimidate. And now anybody who's thinking clearly, like, why would they be sending me a letter asking for release of medical records if they don't already have them? In other words, how would they even know that my child had an exemption unless they already have that information? Because all they're asking for is the school exemption. They're not asking for the medical records. They're asking for the school records. So it's very ridiculous.
So anyway, retroactive permission, is that? what we're
Exactly.
thinking.
Yeah. So they decided picked a few names off of the 5 exemptions. Plus, the obvious hypocrisy is if it's legal to write 1 exemption, it's legal to write 25 exemptions, right?
Mhm.
It's either an approved process or it's not. But that would seem to be the people that are going to be easier targets in a sense. It was all to make an example.
Yeah. Well, so Dr. Brody, how did they publicly shame you? Tell us a little bit more about your story.
Hold on just a second. Could you go to Kelly next? And
Yeah.
thanks.
Well, so Kelly, I'm curious, did somebody turn you in, or was it the same process as Dr. Humiston, where they basically rifled through the school records and found your name and then went from there?
You know, part of the medical exemption pilot project was to gather all the counties in California, 58, together and teach the school nurses how to find the doctors who gave exemptions. And so that process was true for me in one case, and a school nurse was the complainant. And then in 2 other cases, because I had 3 separate complaints brought against me, they were doctors in the public health system who made the complaint. And I would be happy to give those names. The the parents never complained. There was no patient injury. And I did have a letter signed by 2,000 individuals sent to the medical board asking to not do the revocation. I did a petition to reconsider the revocation when it happened, and that was unsuccessful.
What year did you lose your license?
22, March of 22, a year before John.
When did they start coming after you? Was it before the pandemic or after it started?
There was little bits happening in 2019, like saying to the patients, release your records because we're doing quality control and you'll really help the quality of medical care in California if you give us permission to see Dr. Sutton's records on your child. Some parents thought they were at risk of losing their children if they didn't turn over their records.
Yeah.
But fortunately, an attorney working with PIC was able to advise the parents, you don't have to do this. You can rescind your former agreement to share records. And so I did not have any patients sharing records automatically. We waited until we had a subpoena and had to give them.
Wow. Dr. Brody, are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready. My daughter wandered in here thinking that it was safe, but this is not something that probably would interest her, and I just wanted to have the freedom to speak without a reservation. The people, my story began in December of 2020 because for many months now, since the beginning of the pandemic, I had been watching very closely what happened because right from the get-go, it didn't make sense to me. I mean, I read the paper that John Ioannidis had published about the infection fatality rate being very low. Um, the science just wasn't supporting that there was a real pandemic. And in my office, I wasn't seeing droves of people getting sick. People seemed to be fine. They were all anxious and very concerned about getting this terrible thing, but almost nobody was really getting sick. So I was like, this, and then when Bill Gates got on the TV and said, we're all going to have to get vaccinated to get back to normal, I was like, this guy, a tech magnate, is telling us how to practice medicine, and he doesn't know anything about medicine, epidemiology, virology. This thing stinks to high heaven. So I became much more interested when I saw this, and basically there was nothing that seemed to support the validity of what we were being told by the dancing vaccine people on TV. And so I could see this very quickly. This was all a marketing scheme for the vaccine. And I was like, I'm not going to be a part of this if I see anything wrong with it, because I just can't believe
Mhm.
that we really have a true pandemic on our hands. Or if we do, maybe, we just protect the elderly and the rest of the people who have a infection fatality rate of 0.00 something, they can go about their lives. And so within a day or two after it came out, I had gone over what I could see by that point of what was in the Pfizer studies, and I could see that the studies weren't properly done. They weren't looking at the right coefficients. They were I'm forgetting the exact terms at this point, but it was not a valid assessment of efficacy. Um, anyway, I wrote a letter based on that review of the science saying that I didn't see that had persuaded me that it was safe and effective. And then by January 2021, I had gone through the inquisition by the local medical board, and they also filed a separate complaint. By the way, the people who complained about me were two doctors from out of state, one from Connecticut, one from Massachusetts, who I never met, never heard of. And I never had a complaint by a patient. It was just two people who were phoning it in, saying, this doctor, he's endangering the public by telling people to be prudent about their taking this vaccine. And so they never called me up and discussed it with me. And actually, the guy in Connecticut made a completely false accusation saying um, I was doing a chelation treatment of a young child, a 1-year-old child for autism. I never diagnosed him with autism. He had developmental delays. I suggested that the grandmother, who was the custodial parent at the time, investigate the possibility that the child might have heavy metal toxicity, because at that point I was seeing tons of my patients who were testing positive for it, and I gave her some information how she could do that, but I never started a chelation process, and I never in my records mentioned the word autism, but anyway, that's what they said I did, and they said, oh, this doctor doesn't know anything about autism, and he's misdiagnosing this patient. He's treating him with chelation for autism. And, I mean, this is complete fabrication. And I was like, come on, what is going on here? This is complete nonsense. I wanted to march into the guy's office in his Yale New Haven Medical Center and say, hey, what's going on here? What are you doing? You're so anyway, based on all that, my license was suspended. They gave me a false pathway to recovery if I would renounce my statement and say I was wrong. I had done the medically unethical thing by advising my patients to um, wait for better science before getting the vaccine. And I wasn't willing to do that. And so they asked, based on Ilya's recommendation, I took this ethics course again. And again, I wouldn't say that I had done anything wrong. I just said, okay, maybe I could have said it in a nicer way or something, but it was it wasn't good enough, so I failed that. And it was clear at this point that there was no intention of the powers that be of my getting my license back. So at that point, I just threw up my hands and said, okay, rather than having them take it, I'll give it up myself voluntarily. So in December 2021, I gave up my license voluntarily. And since that time, I've been practicing under health freedom law, which we have in Rhode Island, which enables me to do integrative health care, which I had been doing for 20 something years anyway.
Mhm.
And so I can't write prescriptions, can't order tests, can't bill insurance companies, but I can practice in this very limited way, which actually in some ways has been a boon because I don't, it simplifies things for me.
Yeah.
I don't have to argue with patients about whether treating them with homeopathy or energy therapy or detoxification is superior to taking Prozac or whatever the drug of choice might be, a statin medicine. It's just like, that's all I do. That's all I
Exactly.
can do.
Yeah. And it's very time consuming and very expensive to defend your license once they dig their claws into you. I mean, my situation, they had 4 complaints against me regarding the patient in the hospital. That it was a lawsuit, and the wife sued, and the court ordered them to give me emergency temporary privileges, and they basically just defied the court order. And there was a lot of back and forth with the lawyers, and finally the patient's lawyer said, "You're good to go, we've got clearance." And so I sent the nurse, and she's greeted by the police, and she's never allowed in. She doesn't try to shove her way into the ICU. She leaves. But that's what they've got me on, that I sent the nurse without them granting me privileges. And so to defend that, I've spent over $250,000, which is insane. I was fighting for a patient and nobody was harmed, but I know you all can relate. Let's wrap this up with our attorney, Ilya. Kind of give us an overview, and how do all 4 cases, how are we bringing this together and taking down the head of the snake?
Okay, so all 4 doctors, although the circumstances are all different, the one common thing is everything that you guys have been punished for has been speech, and pure speech, not just speech related, not just conduct related to speech, but pure speech. Medical exemption is pure speech. It's a letter. The email that Dr. Brody sent, it's pure speech. It's an email. And the testimony that you, Dr. Bowden, gave in court, because it wasn't you that sent you and the nurse to that hospital, it was the court. The court made an order saying, I'm granting this doctor privileges and access to this patient. Another court overruled them, but that's neither here nor there. That's how the process works. Ultimately, all that Dr. Bowden did was say, I believe that he could benefit from ivermectin, and she said it in court as expert testimony. So all of this is speech, and it's pure speech. The government has a very tough time regulating it. They're not allowed to regulate it. Your employer can, even your government as an employer can. So, for example, if you work at a hospital and they don't like what you're saying, they can fire you. And maybe you can sue them, but it's not really a First Amendment issue. When it comes to things like discipline, being disciplined for something by the loss of a professional license, the government can't do that whatsoever. The only thing that it can do is place minor time, place, and manner restrictions on speech.
And now you've
But
said
the government,
you've said the government, and of course we're so the government is the medical boards.
the medical boards.
Looking at the very instrumental role of the FSMB in that.
Absolutely. So the governments cannot punish you for pure speech. The worst, even worse, what you're being punished for really is viewpoint. Your viewpoint on a certain matter. Viewpoint discrimination is something that's completely forbidden. It's the worst kind of discrimination there is based on speech in the law. When the government is discriminating, not because, you're standing up in a crowded theater, interrupting the film or screaming fire, both things, the government can stop you from doing. It's not because you're interrupting, a government event. It's because your viewpoint, which you have a right to express, nobody says you don't have a right to send an email or to speak to your patients, is not the approved one. It's not the consensus viewpoint, and that's why the government punished you. That's unlawful. Now, there's another aspect to this is that uh, this whole reciprocal discipline, and you can see it. Why would a state with a legislature like Texas or a state with a legislature like Indiana? Texas has made ivermectin over the counter. Anybody can go and buy it. Why would a state with such politics be prosecuting and going after its doctors? The answer is because the medical boards of our states have become unmoored from our democratic institutions. The legislature no longer really controls the medical board. The medical board of each, and there's more than one in the different states, but there are 70 medical boards in the United States and their territories. Every one of them is a member of an organization called the Federation of State Medical Boards. It's a corporation. It's a corporate nonprofit entity. And yet, because all the member medical boards have signed on to its bylaws and its articles of organization and its various other rules, they're all beholden to it. They can be disciplined by this organization. So your government agency in your state can be disciplined by some corporate entity that you don't know who's leading it or what its goals are or whatever, if it doesn't follow this corporate entity's policies. So this corporate entity during COVID, the FSMB came up with a censorship policy, basically saying that doctors who spread misinformation and disinformation, which they defined as anything that's not a consensus viewpoint, are subject to discipline by their state and medical boards. How can this organization have so much pull and so much power over your government agencies? Because your government agencies have ceded to this organization its functions, the most important one being the medical exam. Every doctor in the United States and its territories has to pass an exam in order to get a license. The exam is a common one, sort of like the SAT for doctors. It's called the USMLE. That exam, although it's supposed to be run by each independent medical board, and it says so in the law that every medical board, its powers and duties are to regulate the practice of medicine, to run the examinations for licensing, to do the credentialing for licensing, which is, fingerprinting, make sure the doctor has no bad criminal record with whatever, making sure that he passed his medical school exams, etc. All of that is a state function. All of that has been taken and given to the FSMB to do. So it's not your local medical board, but it's the FSMB, a private corporation that's running these exams. And if your medical board does not follow its policies, the FSMB can punish it by expelling it from the FSMB. There goes its entire ability to license new doctors in the state. So the FSMB is using the coercive ability to throw a monkey wrench into physician licensing in every state in order to push its own policies on states that would normally not have these policies, like Texas or Indiana or Tennessee. And that's a big problem. It's anti-democratic. We don't know their processes. We can't vote for them. And they basically are holding every state's medical licensing process hostage to what are ultimately very, very non-scientific, anti-scientific ideologies. This isn't how you do science.
And I would interject there that a lot of people hearing your comments now, Ilya, would say, well, is that really a problem that they're doing the medical, exams, that they, do some of these functions? They're essentially contracted out to do them. I think it was boring things like, here's how you make a medical practice act. Here's how you do this. Here's how you do that. I don't think it would excite anybody. But what I see that has been totally outside of their purview is injecting ideology. Everybody would think that a medical licensing board organization is just there to help medical licensing boards run according to their own state purposes, not to dictate how they run. So
that's how it starts. You take over their boring functions, and it's great. It's a boon to FSMB. The FSMB makes tens of millions of dollars a year off of what is a state function, what states could be making instead. And again, the problem is if all of the sudden you lose this boring, easy, convenient function of having all the doctors in your state take a common exam, then you have to set up your own exam. You have to set up your own office of examination. It's a massive process that would probably stop licensing in a state for a couple of years in order to rebuild that infrastructure that all the states have given up and given to some private entity to do for them. It's a big problem, and the ideology has exposed the problem with it. But the structural problem is that these are functions that are supposed to be done by we the people, not by some corporate entity whose corporate board has absolutely zero responsibility to any government.
I'd like to interject something here, if I could, just for our listeners. I think there's a confusion here about what's legal and what's moral. It is legal to say your opinion, but it is an ethical responsibility of every physician to render an opinion that he or she believes is in the best interest of his or her patient. That's our moral responsibility to render our best opinion. Failure to do that is a violation of the Hippocratic Oath. So those people who might have had reservations about any of the protocols that were recommended by public health, whether it came to masking, social distancing, vaccination, remdesivir, or anything, they were actually violating their medical ethical responsibilities. Now, in my opinion, okay, because you have to say what your opinion is. And what happened under COVID is our right or our duty to state our opinions as we call it, to call like we saw it, was weaponized. It was being turned against us. And so if you say your opinion and it isn't what we say it should be, then you are being unprofessional and you can't practice. This is unprecedented. This has never happened historically. And I think everybody who's listening should be alarmed by this, because this is a sign that your doctor's freedom to practice ethical medicine has been overturned, been purloined, turned on its head. And unless this is changed, unless this, we are vindicated in this lawsuit and other similar ones, it means your doctor can no longer safely advocate for you morally. They can no longer do their duty to protect you and follow the Hippocratic Oath. All right, I got off my pedestal now.
Well said.
Great.
Ilya, has anybody tried to sue the FSMB before?
No, not in this kind of way. Um, because the problem is it's almost like a kind of organized crime situation where these governments are hiding behind a private entity, a private corporation, um, and acting through it. And in doing that, they're laundering state action, which the First Amendment forbids from being used to discriminate based on speech and opinion. They're laundering the state action through a private entity. So in our lawsuit, we've taken great pains to identify the fact that while it may be nominally a private entity, Federation of State and Medical Boards dot incorporated, it is very much acting as the state, as the 50 different states altogether in a conspiracy, in fact. And that's going to be, our big gating item in being able to sue the FSMB, as well as the 6 different state medical boards who disciplined you. Essentially, they're acting together in concert, and the FSMB is using state powers to do what it does.
Is
And
this,
I would
go ahead.
Thank you. I was going to say that the many things that you pointed out are the disadvantages of having, a national organization, really take over state powers that would be, safer if they were in the state's hands. I think that has limited traction. The point that I believe is our strong point is that when the FSMB specifically adopted, very, they were very clearly written policies to limit speech, to punish speech, to go after it, not just once, but it was a process that they were trying to enforce. The point of our suit, I believe, has to be this clearly stepped over a line from just an administrative, even if it's not ideal. Okay, if medical boards want to give up their authority and things like that to the FSMB, that's one thing. But when it comes to this is neither something that an individual medical board nor a national organization that's coordinating them has power to do, because it's straight up illegal. So that, I think, is what we, and what you're establishing is, because we were told by another council that, well, they have an advisory role. Well, ILEA took that and proved it's not advisory. It's very compulsory. It is clearly compulsory.
Yeah, it's coercive.
Yeah, and coercive, even worse. So that is the point that our jury and our judge has to understand, that this is being used now as a tool, their ideology, and it's well outside of and beyond any legitimate, if we want to call the USMLE and the Physician Verification Service and all that, and call that legitimate business activities of the FSMB, okay, this is clearly outside of that and beyond that.
Is there going to be a role for the Center for for examining the role of the Center Countering Digital Hate in terms of their role in all of this? Because they
So
seem
the Center for Countering Digital Hate is a shadowy organization founded in the United Kingdom, which is now the center of Western censorship, by a person allegedly connected with British intelligence. They began with a fairly, again, these things get corrupted so terribly. They began with a legitimate goal of countering ISIS propaganda on the internet, and then took over other sort of speech policing. And for some reason, they became the #1 speech policeman when it came to COVID information on COVID. They published the Dirty Dozen of the greatest misinformation spreaders. I think RFK Jr. was on that list. And they worked very closely with the FSMB to put together the censorship policy. And of course, Dr. Brody was specifically mentioned in their workshops on putting together these censorship policies as somebody who was who was properly punished. And I think I remember the head of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, Imran Ahmed, said that Dr. Brody's email was a guided missile, but tweets are like nuclear bombs. So it's much more important to punish people who uh, talk not just to their clients but publicly on the internet.
Yeah, but I
So
wasn't
this
talking
gives
publicly. I mean, I can understand this was an intrusion of my patient's privacy and my
yeah.
privacy.
So you were
So
a
Fourth
guided
Amendment
missile.
violation.
Your misinformation was targeted, but people like Dr. Bowden who tweet are even worse because they blow up nuclear bombs of misinformation. I mean, these people not only are they ignorant of science, they're ignorant of history because all of this is just repeats the kind of um, dogmatic suppression of new ideas, new speech, minority beliefs that we've seen throughout history, and it never ended up well. It ended up with bonfires and witches being burned, and then whoever was burning the witches being burned next. So cut it out.
What about our own government, their role? Because the Surgeon General stood up there in July of 2021 and issued a war against COVID misinformation. Have we found any ties between our own government and FSMB and trying to
Absolutely.
influence?
So this whole thing started in California, as we talk about, and California was um, basically dominated the thinking of FSMB as it was developing it, um, the censorship statements. But the guy who was going after Doctors Humiston and Sutton legally in California during this whole process, the guy who was getting subpoenas for their patients' records was a man named Javier Becerra, who was at the time the Attorney General of California, and who during the Biden administration became the Secretary of Health and Human Services. That always made me kind of think he has nothing to do with Health and Human Services. He's a lawyer. Um, the only thing that he did have to do with Health and Human Services was going after California physicians for writing medical exemptions. So he became the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and that's when the Biden administration also became a campaign of censorship through the HHS. HHS put out a lot of documents on misinformation and disinformation. Of course, all that HHS could do was advise, and even that overstepped its bounds through the FDA, as your lawsuit proved. But ultimately, they don't have the power to regulate medicine, and that's why they didn't directly injure you in this case. This was all state action together with the FSMB. But absolutely, the Biden administration was 100% involved in this whole censorship campaign. It's just they had different roles. They pressured social media companies. FSMB pressured medical boards. Biden administration pressured social media companies and various other entities. So everybody had a role to play, but this was definitely an organized campaign of censorship. Censorship, surveillance, and all the other nasty stuff that governments do when they become dictatorial and tyrannical.
What
Given
about,
that,
real
go ahead,
quick,
Amber.
Rachel Levine? I know she spoke at the FSMB, correct? Is that
Yeah. So she was sent to the annual conference where the FSMB passed the censorship policy saying that doctors should be disciplined. And Rachel Levine spoke, and it was remarkable. She's speaking about, there are proven facts, there's proven science, and anything that goes against this proven science is disinformation and misinformation. We know for a fact that the COVID vaccine works. We know for a fact that puberty blockers are safe and effective for children. But like this kind of stuff, it just, even a year after watching that, I mean, even a year after it was recorded, what she was saying was already wrong according to the consensus. As far as puberty blockers, I think nobody would argue that they are safe for children, not even government regulators. But this is the kind of self-assuredness that tells me that the person is not a scientist, but a priest, a
Mhm.
priest of some sort of ideology or religion, because no scientist is going to say that the science is settled.
Ilya, I
And
wanted
Rachel
to
Levine
run
did.
something by you that given the rapidity with which the censorship campaign was rolled out, do you have any evidence that this campaign was organized prior to its being rolled out? That, in other words, it had been planned ahead of time. I mean, we have um, the whatever it was, the October meeting with Bill Gates, the what was it, something I forgot now, but it was a big meeting. But it seems to me that this whole thing must have been planned years ahead of time. It was so organized. Do you have any evidence of that, or is that just my own theory?
So I think that the structure was in place because of what was going on in California during the teens, where somebody got it into their bright minds that the way to fight um, wrong ideas in science is the same way to do that you fight, disease. You identify the source, patient zero, isolate it, destroy it, and stop it from spreading. And out of that was born this medical exemption pilot project, which basically went after doctors for engaging in wrong things. So, but when COVID-19 came around, uh, the infrastructure was there. It's not that it was planned for COVID, but it was just there. This ideology, this idea that science should be run by consensus and dissenting scientists should be disciplined. It's definitely not a usual thing in science. So, when something unusual happens, usually there's a single point source for it. And our argument in the lawsuit is that this point source was California in the teens.
I will add that during the pandemic, on April 1st, 2021, which was the same day that Houston Methodist became the first hospital in the country to mandate the shots, Biden issued out over $10 billion to social media influencers, groups around the country. It's called the COVID-19 Community Corps, to influence people about the safe and effective narrative, propaganda, and then go after doctors like us. So that was, and then I think it was very purposely done. I think they were working with Methodists. I don't have proof of that, but I think that was the day that Methodists proclaimed it would be the first in the country to mandate the shots. And that was 5 months before Biden. And I believe it was done strategically. I believe they knew if they could get away with the mandates in Texas, that they could get away with them anywhere.
Yep.
I had another question for Ilya, though. Could the Attorney General step in and do anything about the FSMB?
I mean, the states are still sovereign, not just, I don't know if the attorney generals can. It might be a legislative thing, but the legislature absolutely can forbid its medical boards from being a part of this FSMB, from being involved in the FSMB. And I think that states whose politics are clearly opposite that of the FSMB, since the FSMB decided to become an ideological organization, should really start thinking about that. I mean, we saw that with all of these organizations being taken over and subverted to ideology. The American Library Association, I think, became ideological, and most states stopped associating with it. Most state libraries stopped, not most, but many state libraries pulled out. All of these professional and interstate organizations, if they become political, run the risk of splitting that whole compact. And I think states like Texas should really look into banning its medical boards from associating. Texas, the president of the Texas Medical Board, Sharif Zafran, is on the board of directors of the FSMB. That's a
Right.
major conflict of interest, given that the Texas legislature clearly does not agree with the FSMB's ideology when it comes to things like vaccines, ivermectin, etc. So he's doing the bidding of a foreign private entity, an entity that's foreign, although it's based in Texas, is foreign to Texas.
It seems like the
Um,
whole basis of the state medical boards needs to be called into question because they have no accountability. They're
yeah,
not elected to those positions, and the people didn't give them the power to regulate medicine in the state. And it just seems like the whole model of trying to regulate physician behavior practice is a flawed model because it's so easily captured by corporate or other outside interests. So
yeah. Look,
I think
they
it,
can regulate your conduct. That's constitutional. But you didn't do any conduct. You didn't give anybody any vaccines. You didn't do any treatment. You said that they shouldn't take the vaccines. That's words.
I didn't even say they shouldn't. I
Dr.
said they should
Sutton,
wait until the science
yeah,
improved.
they should wait. Dr. Sutton didn't give any shots. She wasn't following any guidelines for giving shots because she wasn't giving shots. She was saying that this person shouldn't receive shots. That's speech, that's not conduct. And by trying to conflate the two, the states and the FSMB crossed a constitutional boundary that should never be crossed, especially in science. We're not talking about banning pornography or banning, violence in films, the usual First Amendment claims where the speech is, of questionable utility. Here, it's the most important kind of speech that you can have. You want your doctors to be honest with you as a matter of public policy. You want doctors to be able to disagree with something that may be wrong. And of course, the perfect example of that is the efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine, where everybody could see that it didn't work despite what people were saying, what supposed professionals were saying, and it ultimately destroyed all trust in medicine. And it's going to continue destroying trust in medicine if medicine it becomes a religion,
And this whole
because
paradigm of the state medical board gets to decide what is misinformation and what is disinformation, and only the state medical board gets to decide what is true information. This is a faulty paradigm. As long as that paradigm exists, we can't really have good supervision or regulation of medicine in any state. That's what I'm
but
saying.
even if we all get together as people and democratically decide what's true information, that's also a bad paradigm. This is
Right.
the
I'm not
problem.
saying it should be
You
that.
can't, exactly. You can't, these are completely different kind of ways of searching the truth. Politics and science. Politics we do by consensus, science we do by falsification. It's the very opposite.
Yeah.
You try to disprove the current consensus in order to progress. And we're not going to progress if disproving the current consensus gets your license taken.
Yeah, I think that there are weaknesses to the medical board structure and concept, but there's also utility. It's like doctors who show up intoxicated, and you need somebody. The public needs somebody who's there to police it. That's not inherently a bad concept. What I'm seeing here, and we have, I think our strength has got to be, we've got to pull out something and accuse and demonstrate that they are guilty of doing something that is very far beyond what the public expectation is and the professional expectation. So who in the world ever thought that an overall national body, which would be considered to be more reputable, more principled, more responsible because they're at that national level, is dictating speech and giving, exact and clear instructions on disciplining doctors' licenses, removing these doctors from the public's access to them after the public has invested, large amounts in their education. And we need doctors. Nobody's saying, oh, what an excess of physicians we're suffering from, especially good ones. So the public has zero interest in that type of thing. This is clearly an ideological thing. I think our strength is to show, okay, FSMB, we want a national organization, fine. We have state medical boards, fine. But where did this come in? What in the world is this? This is a complete corruption of their charter, of their public charter to do what they do. That is what we have to show, because it's not hard. It's not like they've changed their tune. This is a piece of music that never was supposed to be played by this type of organization. It's absolutely unsupported. But what happened? They thought they'd get away with it, which, having lived in California, Kelly knows too, let's see, audacity instead of competence and responsibility is what we, like in Chicago, they're just known for their gangster mindset and stuff. But I'm told by one of my lawyers that, it's kind of like you get style points for the more audacious and more sneaky you can be. Like they kind of think that's cool. It's not, but that's that culture, and the California culture, the same. Let's see how far off we can stray from the boring traditional way of doing things. And we're so cool and clever because we can do it differently. Really, it's just that we're incompetent. We don't know how to do our jobs, which I've come to, that is the basis of it. And so that's where this is too. I think we all have to understand this. This isn't because they're, extra clever and they're extra creative. It's really because they don't know how to do their basic function. There's an incompetence there. So how do you cover up incompetence? You start making some big, campaign and some huge direction and enterprise, while somebody else the adults can take care of the real job at hand. So that's part of it. But I think we got to just realize that that's what we're looking at. I was going to ask Ilya or everybody, what do we think we're looking for? Are we looking for, our object? It seems to me, and I'm not sure, but that would be a court decision that declares that the FSMB's policies are illegal, and it was illegal for the state boards to follow those policies on any type of speech restriction and that would be obviously reinstate all their licenses. There would have to be a change at the FSMB. The FSMB gets this court order. Obviously, the medical boards in each state also it would apply to them also. That's what I see as as probably the goal is. I don't know, what are your all thoughts on that?
Yes, that's the relief we're asking for. And of course, also, they should be made to pay some of those tens of millions of dollars that they make each year from doctors seeking licenses. Because although they are a nonprofit, they're a fabulously wealthy business from monopolizing because they're a monopoly on medical examination in the country. And they certainly caused a lot of damage to all of you. And not only the money you've spent defending, but all the emotional damages and the reputational damages,
I think the other thing beyond that I'd like to add, Ilya, sorry to interrupt, is that they've done damage to the people who of America, not just our patients, but the patients of all physicians who have been intimidated by the rulings of these medical boards and have now been afraid to provide the proper care that they knew was best in their heart for their patients. And they, as a result, they provided um, they echoed they echoed the statements that ivermectin was horse paste and that hydroxychloroquine was bleach and it was a joke, and people didn't get these treatments who would have benefited from them. So they harmed lots of people. So I'd like to see as an outcome that this Federation of State Medical Boards has to have its authority severely circumscribed and overseen in terms of its actions on state medical boards. It has to it's overridden its charter. It has to be reeled in. I don't know exactly
Yeah,
how.
and here the legislative branch really needs to step up. The judiciary can only do so much, and there needs to be legislative
Yeah,
reform in the various states that, place some sort of conditions on being involved in these kinds of national organizations that dictate state policy.
Yeah.
yeah. I think doctors need to be free to be doctors, as has been said by many others. And what these actions have done is it's constricted doctors' ability to implement what they were trained to do, which is to exercise their professional judgment. That's
Yeah.
what we're paid. That's what we do every day. We exercise professional judgment. Now, to say that that's misinformation because it doesn't agree with state policy, that's a different matter. If the state doesn't agree, they can, have a conversation with that doctor, and we can go over, what is the truth. But the truth is always it's always one step over the rainbow. It's on the other side of the rainbow. So you can't just be legislating based on what is truth and what's falsehood. You have to have a conversation.
I
And we
want to
have
touch on one thing real quick before we end. Is the National Practitioner Database and their relationship with FSMB. Are they, from what I understand, there is a financial relationship?
Yeah. So that's one of the other parts that the FSMB does. Uh, Most states' medical practice acts, they have a list of bullet points of what the medical board has to do. So examining new doctors is one, the medical board examination. Um, Credentialing them is another. And then maintaining a database. Pretty much every state, definitely all of the 6 states that we're suing, I've looked at, all of their statutes say that they're required to keep a database of all the doctors and their status, whether their license is active, what sort of certifications they have, whether they've had discipline, whether they've had court settlements. All of that is prescribed by your state legislature, and the medical board has to do. Well, the medical board just gave all of that to the FSMB. So the National Practitioner Data Bank is a entity, I think, run by or in parallel with the FSMB. And it maintains all of the doctors nationwide, basically a nationwide database instead of or sometimes in addition to the local state database. And yeah, it's another tool of control by the FSMB over the local boards because they're all required by their laws to keep one. And if they don't, it becomes a big problem.
All right. What I see with this is that what I envision that we want to win with that court judgment that the FSMB has illegally, stepped outside its bounds and come up with an extra function that it's not allowed to do. And the state medical boards should have known that. They acted illegally by participating and receiving that, because any one of them could have said, you have no business doing this. But as Ilya aptly pointed out, there's no exit plan from the FSMB. You're in. It's like trying to get out of Medicaid. It's like, there's no way to get out of it, probably no way of criticizing it. So I don't know. But Then, states that have legislatures that are willing to hear this, like say Texas and Indiana, that are going to be shocked and moved by the FSMB being exposed for having run this campaign. They need to put in their laws. So I would think we need to work with a few states. We're not going to change all 50, but it's very important that it's not monolithic. Like all 50 states, just like accept whatever the FSMB does. If you have 5 or 8 states that have put limits on what the FSMB can do in their state, if their board's going to be part of it, then it breaks that monopoly or that monolithic attitude. And somebody's watching, in other words. And the FSMB would have to conform with that, because it's right now it's a one-way thing. You do whatever the FSMB says.
The power needs to be decentralized.
Yeah, exactly. The states would have to put some restrictions on the FSMB. I think that's what you're saying, Ilya. The legislatures of the states have to put restrictions on its behavior.
Yeah, on their medical boards relationship with the FSMB. So
Right.
whether their medical boards can participate, whether they are forced to follow FSMB rules and regulations, like the censorship policy, et cetera. Basically, yeah, because they're the ones that have the power. Now, the FSMB is very much aware of that. So in conjunction with their censorship policy, back in 2022, they also began actively lobbying against legislature efforts to limit medical board authority to discipline physicians. So, for example, Texas, and Sharif Zafran actually complained about it at the FSMB annual meeting in 2022. Texas was thinking about passing laws that prevent just anybody from making a complaint. It has to be your patient, which means none of you would have been complained about, because none of your patients complained about the vaccine exemptions or the vaccine emails. Texas I think, was thinking about making complainants not be anonymous, so that you can confront your accuser, that kind of stuff. So the FSMB was very concerned and unhappy about that. And so it's actively fighting several state legislatures on laws meant to curtail their and the medical board's authority. So, it's not a passive creature. It's going to be fighting back against any kind of efforts like this by state legislatures to curtail it.
I see us getting this win as creating, aside from just the opportune moment socially and politically where we are in the United States, because so many people are now aware of this. It's not really just a conservative versus liberal thing, because who really wants, their doctor curtailed? It's generally a health issue. And so it's an opportune moment that the FSMB gets shamed nationally. And then it's time to work with at least several targeted legislatures to either make state laws like that, but I'm thinking also make laws for their medical board. Like, this is the limit of what the FSMB will be able to do with you. You're only getting this service, this service, this service. There'll be nothing about who do you, the FSMB cannot target any individual, even speak to you about any individual doctor. They're only there for administrative help in administrative functions. And, to do that type of thing also to not, so your laws aren't trying to counter them. Your laws are already limiting them, knowing where they might go by the history they've already put forth, right? So this has happened once. What do we do to prevent it from happening again?
Yep. Well, they'll lobby against those laws.
Well, and that would be great, because if they lobby against them, it shows their true stripe. If they were smart, they'd quiet down and wait for another moment.
Well, I think if the FSMB gets a heavy penalty, that in itself would make them a little reluctant, once their hand has been slapped,
right,
to put it in the cookie jar again.
Right. They thought themselves artfully audacious and untouchable, and this would change that.
Yeah, this holds them accountable.
Let's hope
It
so.
will if it succeeds.
Yeah, I personally would like to just see it completely dismantled. And it seems to me that we could come up with a national standard test. I mean, who controls the SAT? I mean, we could figure out a way to outsource that to a third party that's not going to censor doctors and control doctors. And I mean, and then the database as well. I mean, that's really what their main purpose is. I'd like to see it just completely dissolved.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mary.
Monopolies are powerful.
I
Mhm.
think we need to move in general, not just in medicine, but in politics, towards a more decentralized form of government, because we can all see what becomes of a very highly centralized government, and it's not good. We need to restore power to the people, but the people also need to step up and be willing to take on that responsibility. But I agree with you. I don't think it serves any useful purpose for the people. It serves its corporate masters, is what I would say.
Well, that seems like a good way to end. This has been a great discussion. Thank you so much, y'all, for coming together so quickly, and Ilya for making this possible. I'm very excited, and we will try to come back and do another update as they come to us. So thanks so much for joining, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody for what they do.
Yes.